It's a great pleasure to join Sheffield University for this special session that you're doing relating to media freedom. My name is Helena Kennedy, Baroness Helena Kennedy. I'm a barrister and Queen's Counsel here at the English Bar. And I currently am the director of the International Bar Association's Institute of Human Rights. Now, one of the things that we work on is media freedom, freedom of expression. We do so because we believe very, very strongly that you cannot have the rule of law, a strong democracy and protection of human rights if you do not have a free press and a free media. It is through information and knowledge that we can hold power to account, find out what is happening at the hands of our governments. We can find out if there is corruption. We can find out if people are being ill-treated. And it's that way that we can correct the inevitable things that go wrong in our societies. So freedom of information is fundamental to democracy and the rule of law. And so we really must protect it with great energy. I'm sure that you know that. Now, one of the projects that we have been running under the umbrella of UNESCO is a global media freedom project. And that project is about looking at how do we maintain protections for journalists. Over the last 10 years, we've seen a huge increase and acceleration of attacks upon journalists and upon the media. It's sort of gone hand in hand with the growth of populism and authoritarian governments. And one of the things that has been alarming is that journalists are not just being killed in conflict zones, they are also being killed or just thrown into prison with impunity. They are placed before courts on trumped up charges, and they are seriously seeing their freedoms undermined. And so we should be very concerned. 200 journalists have been killed in the last 3 years. So we should be very alarmed. I was one of the barristers, one of the lawyers who was went with the rapporteur on extrajudicial killing to Turkey when the journalist Jamal Khashoggi disappeared. And we heard the evidence of his killing inside the Saudi Arabian consulate in Istanbul. And we were made privy to the intelligence reports and the taped recordings of the planning of his assassination. We also heard him being killed, but also the dismemberment of his body. And that experience is one of the most haunting of my professional life. And it was being done to a man who was a journalist, a commentator in newspapers, who was asking for democracy in Saudi Arabia. And he therefore was a thorn in the side of the royal ruling class there. And so he had to be dealt with. And that is the fear, that instead of having open debate about democracy, about the kind of society we all want to have, about giving people opportunities to, through debate and discourse, seek changes in society, what authoritarian rulers often do is they close down debate. Now, globally, as I said, attacks upon journalists and the media has grown hugely in the last few years, and it's resulted in a serious decline of media freedom. According to Freedom House, the world is experiencing the 14th consecutive year of decline in global freedom. And the ability of the media and journalists to report freely and independently on matters of public interest is a crucial indicator of democracy and leads to significant breakdown in the absence of it. Now, we are also witnessing increased hostility towards the media, labeling the media generally, collectively, as enemies of the people. The rhetoric of leaders from some of the world's most powerful democracies, and I'm afraid President Trump was one of those people, decrying the media, accusing them all the time of lying and falsehoods, and saying that they are, in fact, enemies of the people, encouraging conspiracy theories. All of that is undermining of democracy and freedom of expression. Attacks against journalists include physical and verbal attacks, as I've mentioned, online and offline, but also harassment, intimidation, illegal arrests, arbitrary detention, withdrawal of accreditation as journalists so that they can't be recognized as journalists. And many ways are used to suppress the media. And when people see this happening to a colleague, of course, it creates self-censorship. And it has a chilling effect. Some have been killed, as you've heard. I mentioned Jamal Khashoggi, a case in which I was involved, but also Lyra McKee, a young journalist in Northern Ireland, was shot in Northern Ireland. Daphne Caruana Galizia, a Maltese journalist who was uncovering corruption at high levels. She has also suffered the consequences of being someone who is speaking truth to power. The Committee to Protect Journalists reveals that at least 105 journalists have been killed in the last 2 years. The vast majority of perpetrators go unpunished. Now, according to Reporters Sans Frontières, some governments have been unable to resist, using the pandemic to settle grievances with journalists and media workers. Hundreds of attacks recorded at this time. The draconian laws that are used to target journalists criminalize free speech. The COVID-19 pandemic has provided a legitimate justification for governments, both authoritarian and those that claim to be democratic, to implement measures without regard to the principles of legality, proportionality, or necessity, and with some choosing to risk extending their powers beyond the constitutional standard, without the guarantee for review, and relinquishing those powers as the public health situation stabilizes. We've seen that in Hungary, where Premier Orban introduced a law which said that anybody, any journalist or news agency or media outlet that put out information that criticized the government could be prosecuted. And of course, they were talking about in relation to COVID, but it is the law was introduced without specificity, being specific with regard to COVID, and without any limit, any sunset clause to say this will end at a particular time. The International Press Institute's COVID tracker has documented at least 17 countries worldwide in which some form of legislation or decree has been passed against online misinformation or fake information. Now, of course, all of us would agree we don't want false information being put out online about COVID and suggesting that you can cure it by, drinking disinfectant. Of course, we don't want that. But the drafting of that legislation is in such terms that it really prevents frank media coverage and criticism of government when government is not behaving properly. And for example, I've mentioned Hungary, but also Jordan, Russia, Thailand, a number of countries have introduced law that should concern us. UNESCO has labeled this trend a parallel disinfodemic. This session that you're involved in is exploring global attacks on media freedom. And I wanted to mention that at the International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute, we are running a high-level panel, which is a global panel of expert lawyers, some of the most distinguished lawyers in the world. It's led by Lord Neuberger, who was the president of the UK Supreme Court. And Amal Clooney has been the deputy chair. She's a great international lawyer. And there are in total 15 people on the high-level expert panel under this global media freedom project for UNESCO. It's run by the International Bar Association and the institute that I head, and I'm one of the expert panelists. And what we've been doing is we've been producing reports, some of which will help organizations and citizens hold their own governments to account or other governments to account. We've created a number of reports already, and I would encourage you to look at them. One is on targeted sanctions, using sanctions not in a general way against the whole of a country and all of its citizens so that ordinary people suffer for the actions of the powerful, but to go after the powerful, the people who've got money and assets, and they often keep them in other countries, so that many of the Russian oligarchs and the Saudi princes and so on have money in huge levels in the cities of other countries, in London, in the city of London, in stocks and shares, in owning property in London, owning property in New York, Manhattan, having other assets on the south of France, in different parts of the world. And so using targeted sanctions to freeze those assets, to deny visas to the powerful, is one of the ways of hitting them where they will feel it. And so targeted sanctions is one of the things, and we set that out in our report. Britain, United States, Canada, the European Union, and a number of other countries have created what's called Magnitsky Sanctions. And we are currently encouraging Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, and other countries to join in creating these special sanctions regimes which can be directed towards individuals. We've also called for the creation of a special visa for journalists who are escaping persecution and who are in danger because of their writings and the work that they've been doing. We're also calling for a much stronger consular services by the embassies to provide protection and avenues for escape and so on from places where they may be in danger. And we're actually calling for a proper investigation task force to be created, either under the umbrella of the United Nations or by some other international organization, so that proper investigations happen when journalists are killed or thrown in prison or put on trial unfairly. We're doing 7 other reports, and we're working on them just now. One on hate crimes and on blasphemy, because these are the kinds of charges used against journalists in order to punish them for their writings. They're often charged with national security offenses, with terrorism offenses, when they're really reporting on things that are happening. Charges in relation to fake news, disinformation, when in fact they're printing what might well be truthful, and then we're concerned about the closing down of the internet. Closing down of the internet has become a powerful tool in the hands of authoritarian regimes, where they often will close down the internet so people don't have access to information. And we've seen it recently in Myanmar, but we've seen it in Kashmir, we've seen it being used in Belarus and in different places in order to silence oppositions, but also, of course, to provide information getting to the citizens of the country. So I hope that might be of interest to you, and I would strongly urge that you look at the International Bar Association's website and look for the Human Rights Institute's project on media freedom, and some of that information and those reports will be available to you there. I wish you all luck, and I know that you're interested in this issue because you too know how important media freedom is. Thank you.